And we've got Jon Gray. Jon's got over 30 years of computing experience in both industry and academia in Australia and in the UK. Jon's research interests have encompassed parallel and distributed systems, design, database technologies, information modelling, software engineering, methods and tools, organisational capability development, and business process improvement. From 2006 to 2013, Jon led a research initiative for NICTA, focused on software methods and tools for the improvement of business process in government. From 2013 to 2017, Jon ran Performance Assurance, which was a spin-out company from NICTA, specialising in predictive modelling and risk management. Jon's currently working as the CEO and Chief Data Scientist for Catapult BI. He's led numerous consulting engagements with many of Australia's top government departments, including Defence, ATO, Human Services, Immigration, Home Affairs, AUSTRAC, TSS, ETA, and also within state governments, New South Wales and Queensland. He's also worked in large corporates like CommBank, Telstra, Optus and NBN. This consulting engagement covers a range of strategic services, including ICT governance, risk management, information management, program management, and ICT procurement. Jon has extensive experience in planning, designing, and evaluating business transformation initiatives, including enterprise architecture, SOA and ISR information systems integration, cloud migration, data center consolidation, application portfolio rationalization. That's one of my favourites. Legacy infrastructure, retirement, and mainframe migration. Also, Jon is widely published in many fields of software information and information systems and computer science, and is a frequent speaker at Australian and international conferences. I'm delighted to introduce to you Dr. Jon Gray, and he will speak to us this evening on, hey dude, where's my data?
Thanks, Jon. That there is a facility to submit questions while the presentation is going on, and once they've been submitted in the little Q&A box at the end of it, Jon will put those questions to me. So this will probably take about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A at the end, I hope. So hopefully this works. I'm about to share the screen now, and this should bring up my presentation. Is that working all right, Jon?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. It sounds as though I've been very busy and done lots of things, which is true. And I'm still busy and doing lots of different things, and I really enjoy it. And one of the things I really enjoy is sort of communicating and enthusing people about data and data management. So I'm quite keen on DAMA, and I love doing DAMA presentations, and whenever there's an opportunity to speak and to do some data literacy, I jump at the chance. So today's piece is really, it's a data literacy piece, and it's got two kinds of purposes. The first purpose is for people who are unfamiliar or new to data management and aren't particularly up to speed with the different terms, such as what's an asset register, what's a repository. You know, there's a number of concepts and keywords here that sometimes can be a bit confusing when you're first coming to data management. So one purpose of this is to serve as a sort of basic literacy piece around some fundamental concepts. The other purpose is really targeted more at practicing data professionals. So many of you who are joined in to this DAMA presentation and are active DAMA members, you've probably been practicing data management for some time, and from time to time you might get asked to do some data literacy. So the content I'm presenting today is something that I would encourage you to use, edit and recycle. You know, it's my work, but I want other DAMA professionals to take advantage of what I've produced here. And if you've been asked to help out with some data literacy, take these slides, contact me. I'm more than happy to help you do a data literacy presentation. So those are the two main purposes of it today. Let's see if I can skip through it. So I won't go into any more detail about me because John's given you an introduction. Very briefly, I'm the CEO of Catapult BI. We are a data management specialist professional services business. We do lots of different kinds of data stuff for clients, large and small, all around Australia. And we work closely with a lot of data management tool vendors as well. That's enough about Catapult. So given that we've got these two purposes for people who are relatively new to data and also for experienced people, this is a literacy piece. And what are we going to touch on today? So it might sound obvious, but we're going to do some very simple stuff like where does data come from? It's not always straightforward. Information systems, different kinds, this notion of something called the information landscape. And then we get onto some of these key concepts and terms. What's an inventory, a register, a repository? What are they? How are they similar? How are they different? And what do we use them for? Then this notion of what is a data asset? The phrase, oh, data is an asset. You know, we're a data-driven organization driven by our assets. Yes, but what is a data asset? Yes, I know you're driven by it and you value them, but what is it really? And what's not an asset? Then a little bit on the difference between cost versus value of data. And I'll warn you now, some of that can be a little bit contentious, and I'm quite happy for you to disagree with me on some of those points there. Then a little bit more in terms of if you're deploying things like a data asset register, how do you do it? And what's this notion of a data service, a business-facing data service as a way of providing an asset register to business users? And then following on from that, a little bit about how to build data services, capabilities and realization of value. So it's covering a number of topics. It does start off very gently, gets a little bit more technical as we move in. And as I said, hopefully for those of you that are new, this literacy piece will help. And for those of you that are experienced, hopefully you'll find something in here that you can recycle, repurpose and reuse in your workplace. So the title, Dude, Where's My Data Asset? Some of you might be familiar with the movie Dude, Where's My Car? I'm not claiming it's the best movie, or you know, it just happens to be a movie that I saw once. And in this movie, there's two best friends have a big night out, and next morning they wake up and they're very, very confused, and they can't remember where they parked the car or where they are or what happened. And this sort of state of confusion after a big night out reminded me of many of my clients who are very confused. They've been on this wonderful journey for several months, spending all this money on the big new data project, whether it's the lake or the warehouse or the integration platform, and it's been a great time. And then at the end of the project finishes and go, yeah, well, hang on. Why can't we find our data assets? Well, what is an asset anyway? We never really got to the bottom of that. and even though they've been on this amazing journey of this project, sometimes you get to the end of it and they're still no better off than when they started. So that taking that little story in hand, let's move on and look at some of these topics. And hopefully, once you're familiar with these concepts and you have this literacy, then you won't end up going on that kind of journey. So let's start off. So where does data come from? Now, look, it might be obvious to us as data professionals, but not to everybody. And many of my clients, I'll go and talk to them and say, well, where do you think your data comes from? You're an analyst, you're a report writer. Oh yeah, Jim down the corridor, he brings it to us on a USB stick once a week. Yeah, but where does Jim get the data from? Ooh, yeah, no, I don't know. It used to come with a floppy disk, but it's a USB stick now. And, you know, often, you know, I'll go into clients and say, you know, what do you think of the data warehouse? It's one of the biggest warehouses in Australia, and you must be very pleased to be using this on a daily basis to do your analysis. And they go, what? What's a data warehouse? Yeah, but you're a data scientist. No, I've got no idea what you're talking about. And so even in organizations that have fairly well-established and mature data management practices, and they've been doing reporting and analysis for years, the idea of, well, yes, fundamentally, how does data come into existence? Where does it come from? is often a blank for many people. And obviously, you know, it doesn't come, the stalk doesn't bring it. We don't find it in the cabbage patch. So where does it come from? So look, it's obvious to many of us as professionals who've been working in this for many years, but most of our business data is forged in the core business processes of our enterprise. So if we're a government agency handing out grants, our grant processing processes is where a lot of our data gets made. If we're a car rental company, then those core processes of customers renting cars and you know, collecting the cars back and sending them bills, those core rental processes are where most of our business data gets made. And that's true generally for most business data, not all, but most data, business data is actually made in those core business processes that defines your organization. Now, this leads on to a very important topic that is easily overlooked even by experienced data professionals. Processes, core business processes and data are intimately connected. In my opinion, if you want to be an accomplished data professional, and if you want to do good data management in your organization, you really need to understand those core business processes where data is made. Okay. Data gets produced and consumed in many different processes, but also the reverse of this, because they're two sides of the same coin. If you're a business process engineer or a business process owner, and you've got responsibility for an end-to-end process through all the different parts of your organization, you can't be a good process owner and really understand your process unless you have an understanding of the data that it produces and consumes. So this is a very important thing that often gets overlooked or forgotten, is that data and process, they're two sides of the same coin. You have to be able to understand both in order to do one of them well. Where does data live? Okay, so we know where it comes from. It's made in those core processes of our organization. So once it's made, where does it live? So in data management and information systems, we've had this distinction between different kinds of information system. It's been around for some decades now, but it's still a very useful way of describing to people different kinds of systems. And you know, here we've got three main different kinds of information systems. We've got our systems of record, where our core information entities and the business processes are active. This is where our data gets made. We've got systems of engagement that interact with customers, with external information systems. It could be sensors in an agricultural context. These could be Internet of Things, sensors in the paddocks feeding through into a system of engagement, which then feeds data through into the core systems. So we have systems of engagement, and then we've got systems of insight. So once data has been made, we can convert data into a variety of different work products, charts, graphs, reports, and all sorts of things. So those, you know, most systems where data is found can be categorized into one of those three. And this is still quite a useful distinction. So as I said, a little bit more detail. So the systems of record. So this is where, you know, your core data is produced and consumed. So whether it's a tax return, assessing a visa, awarding a grant, any of these processes that are core to your organization, this is where that data is made and where it primarily lives. Okay, so if it's a government agency, you've got customers, claims, payments, circumstances, and so on. Then you have those systems of engagement. They often contain bits of data, but it's usually transient data. It's usually data moving from the outside of the organization into one of those systems of record. Sometimes they've also got performance data. So it could be response times, service demand metrics. There's often useful performance data that you can collect in those systems of engagement. And let's go. Finally, we have the systems of insight, and this is where data work products are made. And these systems of insight, there's many different names for these: data warehouses, data lakes, analytics, visualization platform, integration. All of these are just different kinds of systems of insight, and this is where your data scientists and your report writers produce their work products. Now, moving data across enterprise boundaries. So in some areas, for instance, I do a lot of work in government, both Commonwealth, state government, and often there's quite a long and interesting journey of data from the system of record where it's originally made to some systems of insight where it gets turned into reports, graphs, predictive models, and all sorts of things. And that journey can be quite lengthy, convoluted, getting from its source of production to where it's actually being converted into a work product. And certainly in government, a lot of the work that we do is basically trying to make sure that that journey of data is well understood. Unfortunately, these can be quite complex and convoluted and often not well understood. Some organizations don't actually make data at all, but they do make a lot of data work products. So these are what we would call consolidating enterprises. So it could be your global headquarters consuming data from lots of regions or countries where it gets made and then it gets consolidated at headquarters, or it could be something like a government agency, something like education at the federal level, which consumes data from lots and lots of different schools and universities and then consolidates them and turns them into work products. So some enterprises just do that consolidation. They don't actually make data as a raw product. Another useful concept that we find is what we call the information landscape. And this is quite a useful tool and technique at the executive level. So many of our clients at the CFO, COO, CEO level, they don't want to know about tables and indexes and clusters and materialized views and fifth normal form and all that sort of stuff. They just want to know, yeah, kind of what sort of data things do we have, and broadly, where is it, and you know, what's it related to? And this sort of high level view of where data is in the organization and broadly how it moves around and what are the different systems that it lives in. This is what we call a data landscape. And the metaphor here is clearly the painting on the left. You've got natural things, streams, lakes, trees, paths, hills, meadows, and that landscape shows you the relationship to them. So, you know, similarly, on the data side of the house, here at an abstract level, here's the landscape of the data in your organization. Where are the operational systems, the core systems of record where it gets made? Where are the systems of engagement? You know, how does stuff move around? How is it related to each other? And look, that information landscape, I would suggest, is a very useful artifact for pretty much all organizations. And we use it all the time in terms of talking to our clients about data and where it is and in their organization, how it got there, and what is it doing at the moment. Often that information landscape, it's not always visually represented in this way. Often the information in that landscape's actually in a different form. It's in a spreadsheet or a table somewhere, and often that spreadsheet or table is sometimes referred to as an asset register or a data inventory. So we prefer to use the term inventory because I think this is a more accurate representation. So where you do actually have a table or spreadsheet and you identify the main information systems and kind of broadly what things they have in them and what's the relationship between them, that is what I would call a data inventory. And it's a very, very good starting point. If you're early on your data management journey, a good place is to build an inventory and draw an information landscape. For most enterprises, there's likely to be tens or hundreds of items in this inventory. So here's some examples. We've got our HR records, our customer database, our payroll system, and so on. And typically with an inventory like this, there's often a fair degree of informality in terms of describing them. And often in an inventory, you're not just saying what the data is, but often, is it in the cloud? Is it on a USB stick? So the actual physical media is often included in that inventory. As I said, very, very good place to start. If you've new to the game of data management and inventory, even if you've been doing data management for a long time, an inventory is a good thing to have. Okay, and that inventory allows you to answer basic questions like, you know, what data do we have? Where did it come from? Who can access it? And it's either in a tabular form, or you can render it as a drawing. The drawing's good, and basically an inventory is a very, very good starting point on your data management journey. Now, once you've built that inventory, it's a good idea to have a process to maintain it. Doesn't have to be a particularly heavyweight process, but somebody needs to be able to go around and talk to the various different business areas and find out what data do you have, where is it, you know, and start to build out the inventory and start to draw the information landscape. So if you don't have a defined process and you don't have someone executing this, these things become out of date very quickly. And often clients will say, oh, John, inventory, yes, I know what that is. Oh, we had some consultant in about 5 years ago. It's yeah, not sure where it, oh, here it is. And of course, it's all out of date. So if you are going to have an inventory, just invest a little bit of time and effort into training someone and having a process to keep it fresh and up to date. The next level of sophistication in terms of tracking and managing your data is what we would call an asset register. And what's the difference between an inventory and an asset register? Well, the main thing here is we're now starting to add a lot more detail about our information landscape. So if we're able to drill down inside these different information systems, what's actually going on in there? What are the data sets that we have? What are the specific work products and the reports and so on that we have inside these information systems? So it's sort of going to a much finer level of granularity. It's identifying the source data, identifying the work products. And most organizations, you're going to have thousands or tens of thousands of these data objects. As you start to build out your asset register, there's a lot more. So you might have an inventory of 50 systems, but you could have hundreds of thousands of assets spread across those different things. Now, to create and maintain an asset register, you're going to need a much more detailed and sophisticated process, and it's going to take a lot more effort because this sort of stuff is going to go out of date very, very quickly. So if you're going to commit to one of these, you also then have to commit to what we call an enrichment process. You probably need someone trained as a data steward, or maybe even a number of data stewards if you're a large organization, and your data stewards are going to take that initial inventory and they're going to also use things such as policies, glossaries, business rules, taxonomies, frameworks. You're going to add a lot of detail to that register. So for each asset that you find, where did it come from? How was it made? What's it made out of? Who made it? So there's a lot more detail being added, and your asset register is now containing tens or hundreds of thousands of objects. So as I said, the idea is that you're drilling down, you're going to a much more finer level of granularity in terms of understanding your information landscape. Now, while this requires a lot more effort, maybe an order of magnitude more effort than establishing and maintaining an inventory, it's worth it. And why is it worth it? Because once you've built up your asset register and you have a much better fine-grained understanding of your landscape, you can then start to ask much more sophisticated questions like, how is it connected? What does it mean? Is it up to date? So more effort goes in to building and maintaining an asset register, but potentially you can get more value out because you have a much richer, more detailed and complex understanding of your information landscape. Now, that's what we would call a basic asset register, and it is a significant step up from an inventory. What we'd now want to suggest is, if you really want to move to the next level of sophistication in terms of data management and also get value from that asset register, what you need to do is you need to really start to introduce some automation. There's a limit to what human beings can do, running around with clipboards and spreadsheets asking people, you know, in HR and finance, you know, what data do you have, where is it, can I have a look at it? It reaches a certain level and human beings just can't do it. There's just not enough years in a decade, there's not enough decades in a century to accomplish that and keep it up to date. So the kind of automation that we want to introduce here is automation that will basically go off and automatically find for you where these data objects are in your information systems and what kind of objects they are. The specific automation I'm talking about here is what we call metadata management solutions, or metadata catalogs. These are sophisticated software that will connect to all the different information systems in your organizations and extract the raw metadata from them. You know, with large organizations, large banks, insurers, logistics companies, government agencies, with large organizations, you're going to find hundreds of thousands or even millions of different kinds of data objects. There's no way you can find and maintain and do that manually. You need good automation. However, you know, you also now need to have a much richer process. Once you're automatically finding that raw metadata in your organization, your enrichment process needs to be more sophisticated. You need a metadata registry, you need some data architecture, as well as your standards frameworks. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done by your data stewards. So bringing in the automation helps, but it doesn't do everything. This enrichment of that raw metadata to turn it into entries in your asset register and build up your data landscape, that does require still a lot of effort, okay? However, the value from that is, once you have a highly enriched metadata and you have a more advanced data asset register, then you can start to query that asset register and start to ask some very, very useful, complex questions like, our data, what's its quality? Can it be trusted? What metrics are defined for our organization? How are we performing? These are very, very important questions. The only way that these can be answered is by having a very mature, advanced asset register with automation and with a very good, well-defined process and skilled data stewards to maintain it. So a lot of effort goes in to building and maintaining one of these, but benefits do come out, okay? And the benefits is that improved, much more sophisticated, richer understanding of the data landscape. So this slide here, it's a little bit busy, but that sort of pulls it all together. So for a mature enterprise data asset register, you need that automation, which I described over here. You need some highly skilled data stewards. You need a very well-defined process, and that process needs to be supported by a whole bunch of different artifacts, frameworks, classification schemes, and so on. But the value is you're now able to learn a lot about your information landscape. So that's building up an asset register. Fundamentally, though, what is a data asset? What is the thing that goes in that register? So there's many different kinds of data object. So a data object could be source data from your systems of record, but it could be one of many different kinds of data work products. And what this graphic here shows is, here's our source data from our systems of record. And as we move from left to right over here, we're getting more and more sophisticated work products. So we might have a simple copy of source. We might have a cleansed copy. We might have curated data sets. We've got derived data, highly transformed. We're getting much, much more refined and transformed work products as we move across. All of these things are different data objects. We've got source data, we've got work products. And what's probably useful in your asset register is a what we call a taxonomy of data objects. So this is a classification scheme for the different kinds of data objects that exist in your organization. This is a very high level generic one. If you're an electricity or water utility, you'll have your own variant of this that's unique to you. If you're a bank or other financial institution, you'll have a different taxonomy, but the concept is the same. You need to have a standardized, agreed way of classifying or categorizing the different kinds of data objects. As I said, at a high level, you can differentiate between source, data work products, and then there's lots of different kinds of data work products. This is actually quite an important component of doing data asset management. You need to have this classification scheme that's applied across the enterprise. So is every data object that's found in the organization an asset? So most organizations will create lots and lots of work products every day, new reports, new analysis, charts, graphs, dashboards. There's lots and lots of different data objects, different work products being produced every day. The point of an asset register is to distinguish between all the different data objects and work products, and to highlight those things that are considered to be of value. And so some data objects are more valuable than others. And this notion of value is that if we have this asset register, we track that data work product in the register, we've known it's been useful once, that asset can be recycled, reused, or repurposed. So instead of actually building the same report every month, we'll recycle the report we did last month and run it again. So the idea of an asset is something that will save time and avoid costly rework. So, you know, in order to classify something as an asset, it has to have value. You also need to understand broadly how long it might have value for, and over time, that value can change. So you need to have policies, procedures, and guidelines so that right across your organization, you're categorizing and identifying assets in a consistent way. Now, this is probably a little bit contentious. There is a significant difference between cost and value of data. So cost is often more easily measured. So you can have a measured cost associated with creation or maintenance. For instance, storage costs. How much is it costing you from your cloud vendor to store data? So that's one aspect of cost. Value is much more difficult. Sometimes if you can sell data, there's a market for it. It has a market price. So you could say my data's it's worth $300 because I can sell it for $300. Otherwise, you know, if you're not able to sell data, where does value come from? Well, it's derived primarily from usage. And so data is value if there are known places in business processes where someone will make a better decision and improve the process outcome by having that work product. Okay, so your data asset register facilitates usage and reuse of assets, and therefore assists in the realization of value. And you know, there could be lots and lots of data objects and work products that you create, but ultimately they can never be reused or repurposed, and probably don't have a lot of value. So as I said, it's all about understanding value comes from usage. Usage is about identifying decision points in the business. Somebody in the business will consume a work product, they will make a better decision, there's a better process outcome, and that's where value comes from. So value primarily comes from usage. If you're going to use work products and keep reusing and reusing them, you need to have a good, accurate data asset register so you can find them and reuse them. Now, I'll also introduce another concept here. There is the concept of potential value. So data, we're currently not using it, but it could be used in the future. And the analogy I use here is with potential energy. So if you know a little bit about physics, you'll know that as you lift things up, they acquire potential energy. And when you drop them, you can release that into kinetic energy. A good example here is a reservoir where water can be pumped up from a lower level to a higher level. When you want to generate electricity, you can convert the potential energy in the water by sending it through turbines, which then generate electricity. So that's the notion of potential energy. And you can have a similar notion in terms of data management. You can say data has potential value. Why? Because you have got clearly well-defined processes in place where these work products can be regularly and routinely consumed. People make better decisions. They use them in a constructive way, and therefore the data has value. Okay, when it's stored, it has potential value. When it gets used, it has actual value. Now, in order for that to work, that conversion infrastructure has to be present. So in the physical system, in the reservoir, if we've just got a big lake at the top of the mountain, but we don't have the turbines and the generators, that lake really can't be converted into electricity. So having the infrastructure to do that conversion from potential to actual value is a key part of it. So just because you've got a big pile of data in a lake somewhere doesn't mean to say it has value, but it could have potential value if there are very well defined and well known and understood processes for converting specific work products into better decision making. So another concept that I think is important, and it got introduced very gently a minute ago in terms of metadata, is understanding different kinds of metadata. So I mentioned earlier about those data cataloging tools that can go off and harvest metadata automatically from information systems. That's what we call descriptive metadata, and that's a very important part of building up an asset register, is the ability to automatically harvest and build up that descriptive metadata. There's also something called prescriptive metadata. And prescriptive metadata, the main difference is this describes what data looks like as it currently exists. Prescriptive is this is what data ought to look like. It's what it should look like. So it's prescribing what it should look like, and this describes how it actually is. Now, there's often a difference between what it ought to look like and how it actually looks. And so understanding that difference is a key part of understanding the quality and the value of data. And when we're building up an asset register, we need to understand what is the correct definitions that data should conform to. So this slide here introduces this notion of data definitions. So I think we're probably all familiar with the notion of a tax file number or a Medicare number. There are very precise rules about what a correct tax file number or Medicare number looks like. We can have rules about lots of other things, and so we can have a definition of colors of the rainbow. So here's an example of using a strict definition technique to define a data domain colors of the rainbow. So here we've got the domain visible spectrum colors, which is an enumerated set, and then here's the domain rainbow colors, which is an enumerated set of ordered string values. So this is a very strict, rigorous definition of colors of the rainbow. We can apply that to just about any data domains, and we ought to be applying that to data domains. So every data domain, whether it's tax file numbers, Medicare numbers, indigenous status, whatever it is, there should be very precise rules about what the correct and incorrect values of that data look like. Here's an example of prescriptive versus descriptive. So this at the top here, this is prescriptive metadata. Here's some rules about how we code up indigenous status. So if you're a health authority, a hospital, and you're treating patients, then you at some stage need to code up for your patient, what is their indigenous status as part of your record keeping. And these are the correct values that you should use. And this is a national data standard taken from the Institute of Health and Welfare. In many information systems, so we've worked with many clients in the health context, in hospitals and so on, and the information systems themselves, those core systems, often get this wrong because people have coded up indigenous status in a different way. So one system might have it coded up like this, another has it coded up here, and another has it coded up this way here. So this is a descriptive. This is a descriptive metadata. This describes how things are actually currently implemented and coded up. Prescriptive up here tells you how it should be. And this is very, very important when you're managing metadata, and specifically when you're building an asset register. You need to know what the correct rules are, and those correct rules need to be stored in a metadata registry. So yeah, if you want to do data quality, having precise and understandable and correct data definitions, and making sure that those data definitions are being used correctly and consistently, both at the creation of source data, as you move data objects between information systems, and as you transform data into new work products, you need to ensure that the correct definitions are being used. Where the correct definitions are not being used, you're likely to get defective work products. So correct data definitions are a fundamental part of assuring the quality of data. Now, with your data asset register, that landscape, it's not always easy to build up the complete landscape all at once, and to find and discover, categorize and manage your data assets. Typically what happens is you might start off with, across the different business areas, you know some of the source data, you know some of the data work products, and your understanding of source data and work products across the organization may vary quite a bit, and there could be big gaps. Okay, so the dark blue here, we've got that recorded in the register, but the pale blue, we just haven't got round to discovering it yet. And typically with data asset registers, they will take time to evolve and mature. So just like a good wine needs time in the bottle, an asset register needs time to mature and develop as additional discovery and exercises are done. So the first version of your data asset register probably doesn't have complete coverage across your data landscape. As you improve it and refine it, you might have another release a few months later, and you've put some energy and effort into certain business areas, so you've now got better coverage, and at some point in time you'll get to something which is a fairly stable. It might not have 100% coverage across all of the data landscape, but it's sufficiently well covered to be quite useful and usable. So that's introduced some key concepts: inventory, register, registry, data catalog, metadata. The next topic I want to talk about is, so, you know, how do you make asset registers available and usable to different people in the organization? The way that we suggest you do it is you use this notion of business-facing data services. So a lot of the things like metadata registries, asset registers, these are important bits of data management capability, but in themselves, they're not always easy to use in a business context. So we introduce this notion of what we call business-facing data services. So if you're the CDO, then you probably need access to business intelligence services. If you're data stewards, you need access to your data assets. If you're in business operations, you might need access to and understand the quality of the data. And the idea of a business-facing data service is, here's the interface as seen by the consumers of this service, but, you know, hidden in the background, here's the actual implementation. So there's lots of different elements of data capability, there's the tooling, there's the training for people, there's the process that people have to follow. If you're consuming a data asset service or a data quality service, you don't need to know all the implementation details of how that service is built. And it's often quite important to hide some of this, because some of the raw tooling and the raw data and raw metadata may be completely confusing and unintelligible to these consumers of the service. So we introduced this notion of a business-facing data service. So here's a data asset register. Earlier on, I described some of those elements of capability: our process, our stewards training, our register, our repository. A lot of this implementation detail doesn't need to be seen by the consumers of the asset register service. They probably need some visual interface like this, and maybe some simple search capability to be able to find assets. They don't need to poke around inside the innards of an enterprise data metadata cataloging tool. The key thing here is, once we've built up this capability, we need to be able to build a service interface so that decision makers in the business can consume that without having to understand all the gory details of the implementation. For any organization, the data services that you need could vary subtly from one to another. And if you're doing data management capability uplift, what are the services that the business needs right now? It will vary from one organization to another, but things like an asset service, a data quality service, a business intelligence service, these are all typical kinds of services that decision makers in business will need. I would suggest that something like an asset register service is one that should be made readily available quite soon. For any organization, you're going to have perhaps a subtly different roadmap in terms of when you actually build and deploy them. So where to next? So I've now moved on to the topic of talking about data management maturity and data management capability uplift. Obviously, DAMA Wheel provides a high-level guidance and overview about talking about different capabilities, but any one particular organization, they need to have their own strategy, their own roadmap in terms of these services, these business-facing data services. What do you need? When do you need it? How are we going to build it? How are we going to deploy it? And increasingly, many organizations are addressing these questions through something called a operating model, specifically a hub and spoke operating model. And this little graphic over here at a high level shows the idea that if you're in different business divisions, your finance, your HR division, your manufacturing, whatever division it is, if you need a business intelligence or an asset register service, it can be consumed from the hub. Whoever works in the hub has the job of essentially implementing that service by orchestrating a whole bunch of different elements of data capability. As I said, if you're consuming out here, you don't need to know all the gory details about how it gets implemented. And this is providing a nice separation between the consumption of a service and the implementation of that service. This is a separate topic. I'm not going to go into too much detail today, but how to actually build an operating model, how to make business-facing data services available and sequence them and implement them, that's another topic. And that sort of concludes our presentation for tonight. So as I said, the purpose of this presentation was twofold. For those who haven't been into data management for a long time, are fairly new to it, the purpose is to provide some simple concepts and understandings of some of the basics around data, assets, registers, registries, and so on. The other purpose, and hopefully I'll get some feedback from the community today, as data management professionals, hopefully you can see how some of this content you can recycle and repurpose for literacy exercises in your organizations with your clients. So on that, I think I might stop and see if we've got some Q&A.
Thanks so much, John. That was a really riveting talk, and I think we can attest to that by the fact that no one's actually dropped off during the speech.
That's a good sign.
But look, I really love that the journey from inventory through to the data asset registry to the metadata repository. The way that you tied that all together was just superb. Angela actually made the comment that she loved the concept of the unmentionable legacy when you were looking at the data landscape.
There's always a lot of that about.
I think a few of us can relate to that. But look, very much thank you for that. You know, there's so many great takeaways. I'm going to be studying this presentation quite a bit, John. And I love the concept that data's like wine.
Well, yes, sometimes it does mature and improve with age, but not always. I've got a few bottles in my cellar that didn't improve.
The other thing that I thought was really fascinating, that's a sort of a pet topic to me, is the value of data. We see so often the motherhood statement that our data is an asset, and so a lot of data strategies will start with that, but then they won't elucidate on what that actually means to the organisation. And your description of the data asset and where the value of it actually comes from, the analogy of potential energy, the hydroelectric scheme, all those things are just so valuable, just really great.
Look, you know, my experience is a lot of people think that just because you've got a big lake of data, somehow that's valuable. Well, no, you know, a lake of water isn't valuable unless you've got a means of turning it into electricity. So it's this notion of, yes, you might have a big lake, but unless you've got a way of turning that into work products that people can consume at the right time, in the right place, to make a better decision, unless you've got that, what I would call that conversion infrastructure all set up and ready to go, then there is no potential value. It's valueless. Now that I've found to be quite a contentious proposition, and you know, often fellow data professionals will argue about this. Oh, we can't say to clients the data's not valuable. Why? If it's not valuable, let's explain what value is and where it comes from. Oh no, you can't say that to a client. We've got to tell them everything's valuable. Why? It's not true. Well, so you know, it is a very interesting and difficult conversation sometimes.
It is, and it can be, and you know, say in some client situations where they have switches and they're collecting data on those switches. Telecommunications is a classic example. Why are you storing all that data? Just to say that a relay is still working, great.
Yeah, and look, this is becoming increasingly important as the volume of data captured every year grows exponentially and far faster than our ability to do anything useful with it. So this is problematic. So, you know, if you look at current trends, particularly with, you know, Internet of Things and the vast amount, yes, but who is ever going to use it? You know, can you use it now? Can somebody use this data to make a better decision and improve a business outcome? No. Absolutely. So why are you collecting it? You know, it's got no value. So it is. It's and sometimes people say, oh yes, but one day in the future, it might be valuable. But I draw the analogy with cryogenics, you know, where when you die, you get frozen in liquid nitrogen because some thousands of years in the future, someone's going to come and bring you back to life.
Yes.
No. That's never going to happen, you know. And essentially, you know, people are applying a similar argument to their data. They're saying, oh yeah, just keep it in a big pile, a big vault forever, and one day someone will come along and do something useful with it. No, they won't. Just
So
like, you know, when I
we've
die, if my head's frozen in 6 centuries, no one's going to do something useful with it.
it's going to be hard to thaw out, isn't it?
It is. It's just, and
we've
so
got a couple of questions, John. So
okay.
I'll just read. First one to you is from Angela.
Yeah.
And Angela's asked, any suggestions on how to introduce the role of data stewards in the organisation from a change management perspective? One of the challenges I see is that it implies more work.
Yeah, look, I think, look, one of the tough things with data stewardship is a lot of large organizations we've worked with, what tends to happen is the CDO division or the center of excellence goes through the directory and goes dob, 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 dob. These people look like data stewards. And so they get an email saying, welcome, you are now a data steward. So what am I supposed to do? Well, stewardship stuff. Well, what's that? You know, and so establishing a community of data stewards, identifying them, dobbing them in, giving them a website doesn't actually help at all. I think, you know, the critical thing here is really understanding. It all starts with understanding the business. You know, if you're a car rental company or a government agency or a utility, understand your business. What are those core processes? Who in those processes make decisions? What data work products would they need to make better decisions? So your steward is the person who's doing that. Okay, they're the person who has in their head that understanding. Oh, so you know, I work in the factory. This is how the processes work. This person here makes a decision and stamps this over here. If they had this bit of data, they could make a better decision. So understanding the nitty-gritty details of those core business processes and how data products helps individuals make a better decision, that's the core thing that stewards should be doing. Okay, now it could be that that's someone who has worked in the factory for years and years and years and knows everything it is about stamping metal but nothing about data, so you can educate them and turn them into, you know, factory people who know about data. Or it, you know, it could be an executive who's been working in an agency determining grants for years. Well, you know, yeah, you know grants and you know how to drive a spreadsheet, but let's have a look at this in a bit more detail in terms of these processes and see what better work products will help you make a better decision. So it's the steward is that person who is the person who understands how the business works, but also has additional skills and training around, and how does data work products make decision making better? How is that process improved with data work products? That is the sort of the core of what stewards do. So the question here is finding those individuals in the organization, and if they don't already have an interest in data, you've got to sort of somehow trigger it. You've got to get them interested in it. And sometimes it's through literacy presentations like this, or it's through, you know, working side by side with them, you know, saying, well, you know, do sort of time and motion. This is how you do your job. Okay. Have you thought about getting this data from over here? Oh, I didn't know about that. Well, maybe we could have a look. So finding those people, getting them excited and interested about data, and then starting to build processes and work products around business improvement using data focused on those people. I think that's where you need to start. You know, it's no good having a, you know, 300-page steward's handbook with all the policies and stuff of the organization. That doesn't help. There's no point creating a stewards network unless you've got those people trained and actually doing this as part of their daily practice. So I think that's where it starts. As I said, I've seen so many clients where, you know, they've had a go at it, and you know, I'm not being, hopefully not being too critical, but fundamentally, who are those individuals that know how the business works, making sure those individuals understand how data makes those processes better. That's the core where you have to start. Yeah.
Great answer. It's always a tough one. How do we get data stewards? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? There's another question here from Mark, and he's saying, I think the in brackets, potential value of data is to some degree subjective. Have you any stories on how value was discovered later or maybe too late?
Yeah, that's probably that's probably a whole new a whole new presentation, that one. But look, yeah, look, it is tricky because you can do a certain degree of archaeological discovery. It is possible to go through the remains of data storage and data processing activity. A good example here is we've done a number of data warehouse knockdown and rebuilds for clients, and often a data warehouse is something that's evolved over years, and it starts off as something small and often ends up as being like this huge dumping ground where, oh, this looks like a useful report, stick it in the warehouse. I don't know what we'll do with that data set, but stick it over there. And so, sometimes you can actually, when you're doing a knockdown and rebuild of a data warehouse, you're doing this sort of architectural discovery and trying to find, what has actually been found to be useful, what bits did get reused, and then typically when you build a new warehouse, the actual volume of data that actually gets moved from the old to the new is often quite small. We did one with a big client recently, and I think we migrated 2%, approximately 2% of data from the old warehouse to the new warehouse, because 98% of it was just copies of stuff that no one ever used again. And it was just, so essentially that discovery, also hand in hand with that discovery, is really a sort of distillation of what really is important, what really is valuable, what did get reused. There's also, when you're doing that, you can do what we call a disentanglement activity. So often in older warehouses and older information processing environments, you'll find that master data and transaction data and reference data is all kind of got jumbled up, and so you'll have a file or a report where all of this is sort of like willy-nilly jumbled up together. So we have to sort of like disentangle these different kinds of data from what we found through that discovery exercise. So that's kind of answering it, but there's probably a whole new presentation to do justice to that question.
Thanks, John. Well, it's just gone past 7, and I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance this evening. It's been a great presentation, John. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for putting your hand up and speaking to us in Brisbane from chilly Canberra.
Oh yes, it's dark and cold outside. But no, and thanks for inviting me, and hopefully, as I said, people will get value out of it. And if you are a data professional and you want to sort of recycle or repurpose some of this, contact me. I'm more than happy to share and help you along that journey, because I do have a passion. I think data literacy is very, very important. And as data professionals, it's something we should be able to turn our hand to. So when we come to a new client or a new work environment, if people need a little bit of literacy, it's something we should be able to do. And hopefully I'm helping our fellow professionals in that way.
Fantastic.
All right. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Everybody. Okay. Cheerio.